Hi, everyone. Welcome once again to the Scrappy Cinema Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Ritchie, and with me today is documentary filmmaker Jeremy Seifert. He's here to talk about his new feature documentary, Papertown, which chronicles the town of Canton, North Carolina, as the citizens deal with the impending closure of the town's paper mill after over a century of operation. Papertown will be premiering May 22nd at the Mountain Film Festival in Telluride, Colorado. Jeremy, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, before we get into this project, let's talk a little bit about your journey as a documentary filmmaker. How did you get to this point? Where did you start? I know you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey. Well, the first film I did was back in 2008, shooting on the Sony PD-170 standard definition,
Mm-hmm.
and Super 8 millimeter. Um, yeah, and the way I got into it is I think I was talking trash about some films and about documentaries in general, and my wife said, "Well, why don't you make a documentary?" So I did a night class at the Pasadena Art Center, and I had to make a 10-minute film in 3 months. And the subject I chose was dumpster diving for food, mostly at Trader Joe's because I was doing it with a bunch of my friends at the time. So yeah, I just started filming, and it was great because you could film, at midnight and beyond, because that's when we'd go to the dumpsters. So I could work during the day, be a dad, and then also make this documentary and, taught myself how to edit. And so that was my introduction to filmmaking was, you know, just thrown into the fire of it. And that little film ended up taking about a year, and I ended up with a 45-minute film called Dive, Living Off America's Waste. And it won Best Short Doc at like 22 film festivals around the world, which at the time, because it was my first film, I thought that was normal, but it is not normal. And I have not really had that much success, at least in the festival world since then. But yeah, so that was the beginning, and then I made a film called GMO OMG, about genetically modified food, really more about the herbicides and pesticides used on our food, mostly as a result of that genetic modification, and also just the result of industrialized agriculture. And then a film I co-directed, The Devil We Know, about DuPont Chemical Company and the C8 chemical in Teflon. And that premiered at Sundance. Um, and a bunch of short films scattered all throughout. And then the latest is Papertown, which comes on the heels of a film I DP'd and produced called We Are the Shags, which premiered at South by Southwest earlier this year, which is about the band The Shags, which is an all-girls band from the 60s that many consider to be the worst band to have ever recorded an album. Um, but yeah, Papertown is the my latest project. We literally just made the DCP yesterday to send to Mountain Film for our world premiere on May 22nd.
Very good. And tell me a little bit about New Union.
Yeah, New Union is a film company based here in Western North Carolina in Asheville. And the story behind New Union is the story behind Papertown, because the group of six filmmakers who all came together to shoot Papertown decided about a year into that project that we should sort of combine all of our sole proprietor LLCs and just combine forces to create a new company that would hopefully function on a higher level. Our aim is more commercial work, but New Union is the production company behind Papertown as well.
Well, now getting to the subject of Papertown, the main paper mill, the closure of that mill was announced in March of 2023 with a closure date for May of that same year. So I'm curious how you were able to mobilize so quickly to capture the story of, essentially that countdown and what the people in the town are going through as they face this uncertain future.
Yeah, I mean, it happened very quickly. I heard the story on BPR, Blue Ridge Public Radio, as I was driving around Asheville one day, and they had just announced the closing, and most people found out on Facebook. And I immediately called Colby Sexton, one of the producers, and I said, "Hey, this sounds interesting to me. I think I want to do something." And he said, "Yeah, me too." And actually, Jake and I filmed last night at a prayer vigil, and then I connected with Chris Pruitt, the other producer who lives in Canton, and literally, I think 2 days later, we were filming our first interview with Matt Boydston, who is Matt's mother, Nancy, is Chris's neighbor. Um, so part of the quick mobilization is the fact that we live here, and Chris Pruitt, his papa worked in the mill, and his neighbor is Nancy, who's Matt's mom. So that allowed us immediate access as well to the mayor of the town, Zeb Smathers. The other quickness in the mobilization was that we are all local filmmakers and we all know each other and have worked with each other. So, we quickly decided the camera choice was going to be the Red Raptor, which Chris owned, and the Komodo. Jake, Luke, and Ben together own the Atlas Orion and now Atlas Mercury anamorphic lenses. So we thought, let's shoot on those. Um, the other part of this is that we weren't being paid, right? We knew that the only way to capture it in the moment and live through this moment with the town was to start immediately and hope for funding to come later. The first funding that did come was over 6 months later through the Catapult Film Fund. So that first 3 months of filming was volunteer and everything, all the film gear was donated. I've never had an experience like that as a documentary filmmaker. I've done shoots for free, a day, 2 days, 3 days. And had people volunteer their time, but not over 3 months, like day after day after day. So it was an extraordinary experience, and props to the whole team for sticking with it. The other factor was that none of us had work at the time. It was a very dry spell for us as independent freelance filmmakers. So as hard as that period was, it allowed us the freedom to launch into this thing. And, it is terrible not to have any money or zero budget, but also the freedom of that was dreaming up whatever we wanted to do with the equipment we had. So I had all these ideas to do really long gimbal shots, and we could try them more than one time and coordinate with some of our characters to do them. Whereas if we had a shoestring documentary budget that we were operating under, the answer would be no to so many of these things. Like, no, you can't do that. No, we don't have money to, do the movie again tomorrow or whatever it is. So, yeah, it was a painful freedom that we had without any money.
Well, I wanted to ask you, I mean, you spoke about some of the cameras you used, and having that time is interesting because it is such an urgent timeline, so to speak, but this film feels very lyrical. It looks great, obviously, and you really seem to be able to capture take your time and capture the town uh, in a way that shows it off. Everything looks amazing, whereas there's a version of this where someone rushes in, shoots some talking heads, and slaps this together very quickly. So I guess it sounds like having that freedom, the joy of being unemployed at times, to really experiment and get these incredible shots that wouldn't have been possible otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know how many shoot days we had during that first 3 months. No one was keeping track, really, but probably some weeks we filmed 4 times a week, some, only 2 times, 3 times. But again, yeah, we didn't have the limitation of the budget to say, well, we only have a budget for, 10 shoot days. So that's what you have to do. Um, so yeah, again, I mean, it sounds like I'm, celebrating the fact that we had zero money. I'm not, but it did allow us to really be creative and to take our time. And then, after that initial 3 months, which was the time we found out to the closing of the mill, then we kept going. So then we had time to say, okay, what do we need to do next? What are we lacking? And then revisiting our main characters. And then, I had idiotically thought that we would finish this film in a year. That didn't happen. A big reason because we didn't have the funding. So the little that we did have, we put towards editing and sizzle reel and, trying to then go get more money. And then Hurricane Helene happened, and that devastated this entire region, affected many of us personally. There was a good 3 to 4 months where everything stopped as far as working on the film and editing, and because we were, dealing with our own struggles and no electricity, no water. But we started filming Helene and our characters in the aftermath of Helene, and thought that this was going to be definitely included in our story. And then later we realized in the editing that it was just too much of a departure from the story of this Appalachian town losing its economic backbone and their identity as a community. And that this Helene was just such a, a huge storyline that it almost threatened to sort of take over our original intent. So we chose not to include all of that in the making of the film.
It's very focused. And speaking of that focus, Pactive Evergreen did not participate in the film. Those are the owners of the paper mill. But I wonder if maybe for your purposes that led to a more interesting film or a better, more focused narrative that, it really isn't about their explanation. It's more about the effect on the people. So how did you feel about crafting this story without their input?
I was fine with it, honestly. We got either no's or just no answer, no response from them. But the whole time I was just doing that sort of to like do due diligence. Like, all right, but it was like we already knew what they were going to say, right? Which is this like performative, scripted response, and sort of inhuman response. The one of our characters, Kenneth the barber at Champion Cuts, which, Pactive Evergreen at one time was Champion. That was the name of the paper mill. So Champion, you see Champion a lot. There's Champion Credit Union, Champion Cuts for haircuts. But he put it really well in the film. He said, most of the people who own this paper mill, they've never been to Canton. They don't know anything about it. And he says, that's modern times for you. Um, but yeah, so it I liked the fact that they didn't want to participate so that we could just experience it how the people of Canton experience it. They weren't getting the answers. They didn't have the wherewithal to like, I'm gonna go interview the CEO of Pactive Evergreen. So we got to experience it and the viewer will experience it as the town actually experienced it versus coming in and then crafting a documentary that shows all these different angles and things. Instead, you're just living through the moment with the people of that community.
Yeah, it's not, on the surface you might think, oh, this is going to be a David versus Goliath story and, who's going to win out in the end. But in reality, I feel this is really a lot more about these people know this is happening. There might be some efforts to save it, but at the end of the day, they know how this is going to go. And so, how does that affect them? Honestly, if Pactive Evergreen had a perfectly logical response for you, it doesn't change, what the people were meeting, what they're going through the film. I wanted to ask you about the people who we see. Now, you mentioned some of your personal connections earlier, but how did you go about sort of endearing yourself to the people of Canton and getting their participation?
I mean, I'm just an endearing person. I show up, people like me. Um, well, I mean, we had a shoe in because Chris Pruitt is producer and his papa worked in the mill for 30 years. We did spend a lot of time with his papa, who, as the editing happens, his papa's role got reduced and reduced and reduced. But and I think, as I mentioned, his neighbor was Nancy, who is the mother of Matt Boydston, who is our first major interview. So, and then there was a connection to Zeb Smathers, the mayor. And so I think, I have had the experience where Appalachian mountain people can be very closed off until they get to know you. That was my experience with The Devil We Know, which took a longer amount of time to get that kind of access. We had it almost immediately with these characters. And I mean, it wasn't just because of Chris's connections. I mean, when we showed up for the first interview with Matt Boydston, I stepped out of my car, which is a Volkswagen Golf, and he said, I knew Ewens is from the city the second you stepped out of your Volkswagen Golf with your tight pants and your, she said, chai oat milk latte, which is literally the drink I had in my hand. Um, and I mean, we were immediately joking and having a great time with Matt, and the same with all the characters. And the amazing thing about everyone we spent time with was, I mean, they were pissed off, they were frustrated, they were scared, um, in this cloud of unknowing, but they were also so filled with humor, just fantastic senses of humor, just about life in general, and joking with us as the filmmakers. And so there were a lot of lighthearted moments with them, and just hanging out and getting to know each other. When the camera wasn't always rolling, and so we did spend a lot of time with our characters, just hanging out and getting to know them, drinking moonshine with the Caps brothers down in South Carolina.
You had mentioned it was about 6 months before that you finally found that first bit of funding. How did it go after that? Were you able to eventually get paid? And at what point in this process, I know Dave Matthews is credited as a producer, executive producer on this. At what point does he become involved in the project?
So the money question, right? And how to make a documentary or how not to make a documentary, depending on your viewpoint. Yeah, we did also get funding from the Ford Foundation Just Films. That was a huge win for us. That ended up taking over a year. Very long, slow process, but so grateful for them. The Foundation for the Carolinas also stepped in very early and gave us a small grant, which was huge for us. And then we did not raise the rest of our budget. We had a budget close to $900,000, which is, you know, fairly normal for a feature-length documentary, and we brought in maybe 1/6 of that. So, as the director and one of the cinematographers and sound person at times, I have not been paid to work on this documentary, which is insane. Um, and so, we're still chugging along. We do have our final cut. We have our world premiere at Mountain Film, May 22nd. So we did it. We do have some debt on our own personal credit cards and whatnot. We're still trying to raise some money. There's an additional executive producer credit available if you're listening to this and you just want to be a part of the team. Come find me. But yeah, late in the process, and literally as were doing the color grade for the film and looking to start the sound design and mix, I reached out to Dave Matthews because he had just done a little solo song on his Instagram, on Dave Matthews' Instagram, and it was in response to ICE and what was happening in Minneapolis. But the song was like so perfect. He was talking about billionaires and I just want my fair share, and so I reached out to him excited that, like, whoa, you might be writing a song that could be perfect for this film. And we were texting back and forth, and I sent him a cut of the film, and I didn't think he would actually watch it, but he did. And 2 weeks later, he was texting me about how he loved the film, and it was like both heartbreaking and hopeful. And he said I could use any song we wanted from whatever he's done. And I chose a few songs, and I reached back out to him, and he said, "Actually, I'm working on something." And then about 2 weeks later, he sent me this song that he wrote for Papertown, and I mean, it captures the film and the place in a really beautiful way. And then he had Sierra Farrell sing on it with him, and Yeah, it's incredible. And so I asked him to come on board as an EP, and he said yes. So that was kind of are saying thank you to him for the song, like, hey, come on and be an executive producer on this film, as our way of saying thank you because we don't we can't pay you. Um, so yeah, it's a really cool thing, and my hope is that that attachment to the film will. I told Dave, I said, this is a film made by nobodies about nobodies, and it's a story that would live in obscurity had we not made this documentary, but also having him attached to it, I hope will sort of break it out of just this regional location and story because it is a universal story. And that's, I think, one of the reasons this story ended up on the front page of New York Times last summer, because they understood it to be a story for all Americans because it's relatable on a human level for all of us, but it's also important on an economic level for all of us as well.
With this documentary, you're following these folks as they, they're heading towards this date. The date comes, and then you continue to follow them. I'm curious how you decided, and this is something documentarians always struggle with, but how did you decide, all right, I'm done. We're not following any further. We got to stop, put the cameras down. We've got to start putting this thing together.
Um, yeah. Well, we thought we were done right before Hurricane Helene happened. We had, it'd been a year. We'd followed up with our characters. We got some great stuff. But as we were editing it, we knew our act three was pretty weak, and we just didn't know how to make it better. And we were continually trying to get inside the mill, but we couldn't. Pactive Evergreen just wouldn't allow it, even though the mill was closed. And then Hurricane Helene happened, put everything on pause. That pushed us into the next year, 2025, at which point Spiritus Worldwide purchased the mill. And with the help of Zeb Smathers, the mayor, we got in contact with Eric Spiritus and got permission to film in the mill. And we brought one of our main characters, Roger Frady, to the mill with us. And after we filmed that, we knew we had we were done like filming and that we had all the material we needed to finish the film. And from then it's been almost 10, 11 months to now have a final cut of the film.
And it's one of those things, uh, it's interesting as a documentarian. Often these projects follow you for years, or maybe for your life. 10 years from now, someone will say to you, "Whatever happened to that town with the mill?"
Right.
So you do sort of always stay in touch, in some regard as to what's happening. You're having this premiere screening coming up, but have you had a chance to screen the film for anyone in Canton? And I'm curious if you have, what the reactions have been.
Um, we have not, and
Okay.
we are planning a local private screening for the people of Canton, which we're really excited about because, so often you go and you spend all this time with these people and, they think maybe like a news program, the story is going to come out next week or maybe in a month. And so many of our characters have been circling back with us going, hey, are you guys going to make this film? Like, they don't understand the process and how long it takes. And then often, the film's released, you go do your world premiere, you go festivals everywhere, and the people who the story is about are hearing about it, screening in all these places, and like they still haven't seen it, right? Because it's not, there's like a year-long process of festivals to then sell the film and then, show up on Netflix or HBO or whatever. So we're doing a private screening for them before our world premiere, which we're really excited about because we want them to see it and experience it before the rest of the world does.
Lastly, you've had success, and I know you've already given some great tips, like don't get paid and make sure you run up some credit card debt. But I'm curious what advice you might have for people who are a little earlier in their documentary career, as to how to chart their way through everything we're facing right now. Not
Um,
everything in the world, that's a bit much, but within the world
yeah,
of media creation and documentaries.
within the dark, dark landscape of independent documentary filmmaking. I mean, get a degree in engineering so you can like make money. and then make documentaries on the weekends. No, it's pretty bleak out there, right? But there is money to be found. You just have to be vigilant and persevere. My advice though would also be start with a short film, start with a short documentary, and tell that story well. And you can do that within a month, maybe even weeks, or maybe a couple months. And you can do that for free or for a very small budget. And then you will also have done the important work of starting something and finishing something. And then if there is a bigger story there and it does deserve 60 minutes, 70 minutes, 80 minutes, then you can use that short doc as a launching point to hopefully get the money and interest to make that feature film out of the short doc. But yeah, I would start with something short that, let's say the feature doc never happens, but you still have a really solid short film that's finished that you can go into festivals, and it can be a piece that you did and can launch you into your next project.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Jeremy. The movie looks wonderful. I really enjoyed it, and I wish you a lot of success with it. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Once again, my guest has been documentary filmmaker Jeremy Seifert. His new feature, Papertown, will be premiering May 22nd at the Mountain Film Festival in Telluride, Colorado. You can find out more about the film at papertownfilm.com. Until next time, everyone, stay scrappy.